And just give me a minute. I'm just sharing my slides.
Yes, yes.
Good evening, all. Thank you for the warm introduction, sir. And is my slides visible to you all?
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you. Sir, it's a privilege to be introduced by you, and I also welcome my co-speaker, Dr. Muthukumar, for the session. So I would be going straight into the topic. So the question and pertinent to the topic are, when do we do a renal transplant, that is an ABO incompatible renal transplant? How do we determine the isoagglutinin or the antibodies, tube or the gel method? How do we reduce the antibodies? Do we do a plasma exchange or plasmapheresis, double filtration plasmapheresis, or a glycosorb column? And what is the role of rituximab as a desensitization protocol? And when do we proceed with the transplant? At what titer? And a general note on the induction, maintenance immunosuppression, and antibody monitoring post-transplant. So, what are the objectives of renal transplant? The objective of a renal transplant is to ensure the patient doesn't need any form of kidney replacement therapy for rest of his life. Also, we need to keep in mind the lifespan of the patient shouldn't be shortened. What have we achieved over the years is the incidence of steroid sensitive rejections have been significantly reduced. However, the incidence of steroid resistant rejection continues to remain the same mostly. Why do we do an ABO incompatible transplant? Tissue and blood incompatibility have been traditionally an absolute contraindications to renal transplantation. This was based on historically poor outcomes when renal transplantation was attempted across the ABO barrier or when the patients were sensitized to HLA. In addition, improvement in the results using disease donor allograft limited the enthusiasm of an ABO incompatible transplantation in late 80s. However, a decline in the availability of disease donor kidneys in certain countries like Japan because of the longevity have again renewed the enthusiasm for an ABO incompatible transplant. Plus the burgeoning of CKD, ESKD cases and limited donors, Indians have also adapted to the ABO incompatible transplant. Cost is certainly a feature with an ABO incompatible transplant. Rejection rates are clearly higher as compared to an ABO compatible transplant. Factoring both, kidney pair donation is certainly more scientific, cost-effective strategies, fairer outcome to engage ESKD patients going or requiring a renal transplant. ABO blood group consists of four common types: A, B, AB, and O, with B and O being the most frequent in India. It is, I think, A and O in the Western world. The antigen expressed on the erythrocyte, lymphocyte, platelets, and also on the epithelial and endothelial cells. Formation of blood group antibodies occurs against those antigens which are not native to the host. Thus, antibodies to both A and B are found in patients who have an O blood group, and patients who have an AB blood group do not have any antibodies. Given the distribution of blood group antigens and the disease donor program at least PGI Chandigarh, the waiting list for an O blood group is exceedingly high. In addition, the O blood group patients also tend to have a higher isoglutenin antibody compared to those with A and B. That is, patients of O blood group have higher anti-A antibody than patients of B blood group and have high anti-B antibodies compared to patients of A blood group. Also, the blood group A can be divided as blood group A1 or A2, or what some people say is A1 and non-A1. The antigenic expression of non-A1 is quantitatively and qualitatively less as compared to A1, and the overall immunogenic risk of non-A1 is less compared to A1 blood group. Hence, if you factor the overall immunogenicity, it is basically an A1 donor would be highly immunogenic, followed by B, followed by A2 or non-A1. Given the lower immunogenic with A2 blood grouping, the donor kidneys from A2 can generally be successfully transplanted into recipients with low pre-transplant anti-A titers without use of any desensitization. 80 to 85% of A blood group are A1, and non-A1 comprises of 15 to 20% of them. It was initially reported that an higher antibody titer predisposes to an increased risk of antibody-mediated rejection. It is unclear whether an elevated baseline antibodies predisposes to longer, poorer outcome given the initial success through desensitization. There is a marked difference also between the reporting of ABO titers between various institutions, also within the same institution depending upon the type of. Historically, tube technique or tube dilution method has been the most commonly used. Even in PGI till recently we were using the tube dilution method. Tube dilution method estimates IgM antibody and total antibodies, and then you can deduct and say that IgM and IgG antibodies. In addition, there is an observer bias or observer variation with the tube dilution methods. Thus, a titer of 1:32 may be somewhere in between 1:16 and 1:64. In recent years, the tube dilution has been overtaken by the gel agglutination test, which is sensitive, has good reproducibility, quantitative, easy to perform, and less time consuming. Knowing the method of estimation is important as titers differs based on the methodology. Evidence also demonstrate that the gel column agglutination has got a better reproducibility even among different institutions. So the Indian Working Group recommendation states that the gel column agglutination test is recommended as the method of choice for antibody assessment. The tube method is an acceptable alternative. The Indian Working Group recommendation was published in the year 2019 in the Indian Journal of Organ Transplantation. The next is, what is the target pre-transplantation? That is, what should be the antibody titer just prior to transplantation? Both IgG and IgM antibodies are present in circulation in an ABO incompatible recipient. However, IgG is more relevant to clinical outcome as compared to IgM antibodies, because IgM antibodies are confined to the vascular spaces and are easily removed with any sort of desensitization. Higher pre-transplant IgG titers are associated with lower rates of graft survival and increased rates of acute rejection and also chronic rejection. The British Transplant Society guidelines recommends a baseline titer of less than 1:8 prior to renal transplantation. Evidence from Japan suggests that some investigators have gone on to perform a renal transplantation even with a titer of 1:128. The risk of rejection is high when you go and transplant at that kind of titers. Hence, the current consensus is to achieve a titer of less than or equal to 1:8 by a gel agglutination method. The Indian Working Group recommendation states that the pre-transplant IgG antibody should be less than or equal to 1:16, which is more liberal, and it can be taken as a cutoff to go for ABO incompatible transplant. The outcome of an ABO incompatible transplant depends on multiple factors, and therefore the patient and the caregivers needs to be counseled and educated that the titers are not alone the sole factor in determining outcome. See, the displayed study is one of an old study which was published in the year 2000 in the Journal of Transplantation. And this study is from Japan, where 67 patients underwent ABO incompatible transplant in between 1989 and 1995. 61 out of the 67 recipients were included for an analysis. The graft survival rate at 1 year, 5 year, and 8 year in patients with a titer of less than or equal to 1:16 was 81, 67, and 67% at 1, 5, and 8 years respectively. And those with a titer of 1:32 to 64 surprisingly had a better outcome, that is 94, 91, and 80% at 1, 5, and 8 years respectively. There was no difference in the outcome in between patients who had a titer of 1:16 and 1:32 to 64. However, in patients who had a titer of greater than or equal to 1:128, had a 1 year survival, 5 year survival, and 8 year survival of 43, 29%, and 29% respectively. So the conclusion was preoperative maximum anti-A, anti-B IgG titers correlated with long-term graft survival in ABO incompatible living transplantation. So the antibody removal strategies. So this is the heart of the lecture. The reduction of the circulating anti-A or anti-B antibodies to pre-designated targets, that is 1:8, is a key component of an ABO desensitization protocol. The two most common methods for desensitization are immunoadsorption or plasma exchange. Though plasma exchange and immunoadsorption are commonly employed for ABO incompatible transplant, there is no high quality evidence in the form of randomized trial to actually support their use. The outcomes are comparable, including the long-term outcomes as per the meta-analysis. The choice of technique is related to the availability, cost, comfort of the technique. Plasmapheresis prior to an ABO incompatible transplant is associated with increased bleeding risk during surgery. There can be oozing, venous oozing. Selection of the immunoadsorption is the method of choice for lowering the antibodies, but is expensive. Immunoadsorption is cost effective when you require more than 4 plasma exchange prior to transplant. That is in patients who have an antibody titer of more than 1:128. Plasma exchange can be just done in the form of simple plasma exchange or a double filtration plasma exchange, which I would be dealing later. The frequency of plasma exchange should be individualized based on the titers. Regarding the use of plasma in plasma exchange, those patients who require more than 4 plasma exchange or those with bleeding diastasis would require flush frozen plasma. In that case, the priority is to give an AB blood group plasma followed by a donor blood group plasma. Immunoadsorption columns are traditionally not recommended for reuse. However, because of various factors, we have been reusing the columns, and there have been multiple reports of how well it can be reused. And the traditional methods of reuse are saline flushing followed by ETO sterilization. The next is double filtration plasma exchange. Double filtration plasma exchange is a semi-selective blood purification technique, which is actually an extension of the plasma exchange. In DFPP, you have 2 types of filters. The first filter is a plasma separator, and the second is a plasma component separator. The blood is passed through a plasma separator. The plasma separator separates the plasma from the blood cells, and the blood cells are passed to the body. The plasma is further processed to a second filter which has got large and which has got pores which segregates larger and small molecular components by a plasma component separator. The large molecular weight component and including pathogenic substances can be disregarded, and the small molecular weight substances like albumin can be returned to the patients. The advantage of a double filtration plasma exchange is the volume of replacement fluid is significantly low for a unit of immunoglobulin removed as compared to a simple plasmapheresis. The slide depicts the number of sessions of plasmapheresis required for a fruitful transplant with a target of at least 1:16. This is from the John Hopkins experience. All the patients with a titer of 1:16 or below received 2 plasma exchange prior to transplant. A greater number of post-transplant treatments was delivered to patients who had high titers prior to desensitization or had antibody rebound post-surgery or had antibody-mediated reduction. So if you see, if the pre-transplant antibody titer is about 16 to 32, you would require 3 sessions of plasma exchange. If it is 64, you would require 4 sessions. If it is about 128, you would require 5 to 6. If it is about 512, you will require 9 to 10. And about more than 512, you will require more than 10 sessions. This is sort of a thumb rule. I don't think, it's biology. So it's not that every patient would, adhere to what is being displayed in this slide. And also 2 points that one need to factor in with respect to the titers and the number of sessions of plasma exchange is these are all these antibody assessment by tube methods, and they were just simple plasma exchange and not DFVP. The number of sessions wouldn't be the same if you are using a gel-based technique for assessment of antibody and a double filtration plasma exchange. So the next is on the glycosorb column. There are other columns also which are available, but the one that is recommended by the most is the glycosorb column. Glycosorb column in the first treatment reduces the IgG by 56% and IgM by about 81%. Multiple immunoadsorption treatments may become necessary before the patient gets to the baseline titer of less than or equal to 1:8. A study reported that there may be 7 sessions of immunoadsorption that is required for a titer of about 1024. An important advantage of using an immunoadsorption technique is it requires no replacement fluid, and there is no risk of hypotension as compared to a plasma exchange. The major downside of immunoadsorption is the cost, which makes it less attractive in an Indian scenario. However, if one requires more than 4 sessions of plasma exchange, the glycosorb or the immunoadsorption column may also prove cost effective. As stated in the previous slide, I would again state the reuse of immunoadsorption column is not recommended. However, it is practiced, and it is simple saline flush post immunoadsorption followed by an ETO sterilization and storing it at 2 to 8 degrees in a dark place. So this is the Indian Working Group Guidelines of Antibody Removal or Preconditioning Protocol. The selection method should be decided by the availability, the cost, and the experience of the center. Immunoadsorption is the method of choice for lowering antibody titers, but is expensive. Immunoadsorption is cost effective when you require more than 4 sessions of plasma exchange or when an antibody titer is more than 1:128. Plasmapheresis may be performed if immunoadsorption and double filtration plasma exchanges are not possible. The frequency of plasmapheresis should be individualized based on titers. In double filtration plasmapheresis, crystalloids with or without albumin should be used as replacement. AB positive plasma followed by donor plasma should be considered in case of coagulopathy or if the plasmapheresis session is more than 4. And immunoadsorption columns may be reused and saline washes followed by ETO sterilization and storing in dark is recommended by the Indian Working Group recommendation. So the next is the intravenous immunoglobulin. Intravenous immunoglobulin has been historically a part of an ABO incompatible or an anti-HLA desensitization protocol. However, the enthusiasm for intravenous immunoglobulin has declined over time because there could be presence of anti-A and anti-B antibodies as well in IV immunoglobulin. You can use IV immunoglobulin patients who are at high risk of infections. In such group, the Indian Working Group recommends that you could choose IV immunoglobulin which has got low antibody titers. I'm not very sure that most of the Indian companies come up with such sort of data. If you are using IVIG, it should be 100 ml per kg post plasma exchange. Suppose it's a 60 kg man, you could use one vial, that is 5 grams of IVIG. The next time you could use 2
Results,
vials of
would it
IVIG.
show that the ferricidox
So
and
this is the
defabrum
Indian Working
have
Group
very
recommendation,
similar
which says you need not have to
in the change
routinely
in
prescribe to
ferritin and the
IVIG.
changes in
Can be
cardiac
restricted to
start
patients with high risk.
at the very
So
similar
the next important part is the rituximab, which along with immunoadsorption or plasma exchange is the heart of desensitization. Prior to rituximab, it has been splenectomy, and there is data to suggest that rituximab is superior to splenectomy, and also the splenectomy bears morbidity in a patient with ESKD. ABO desensitization protocols employ rituximab along with plasmapheresis and immunoadsorption. The dose and the time has been largely variable. People have used from 100 milligrams to about a gram of rituximab, and also the duration, right from day minus 30 to 1 day prior to transplant, people have used rituximab. The British Transplant Society recommends that you need to use rituximab. However, in the absence of specific data on dose and outcomes, there will be no specific dose that has been recommended. And there is a study by Jenberg et al. Who reported that similar outcomes at 3 years of an ABO incompatible transplant using immunoadsorption versus rituximab alone in ABO incompatible transplant. The Indian Working Group opined that rituximab could be used in low doses, that is 100 milligrams to 200 milligrams, approximately 2 weeks prior to transplant, because that is the time you would have an ultimate CD19 or B cell depletion. And you need to also keep in mind there is increased risk of infection when you use a combination of rituximab and ATG. That would be, you would be knocking both the T and the B lymphocyte, and that needs to be explained to the patients. The next is on induction and maintenance agents. Rituximab, as stated in the previous slide, rituximab along with ATG increases the risk of infections. Although a small studies have found no difference in the rate of infection, I believe in an Indian scenario, use of ATG and rituximab, there would be an heightened risk of infection. There have been no, head-on studies to suggest or to draw any suitable conclusions. Hence, a caution is expressed. Routine titer monitoring of all patients is controversial in the post-transplant period. However, post-transplant plasma exchange would need to be offered when there is a graft dysfunction with an antibody-mediated rejection, or there is an increase in 2 to 4 folds increase in the antibody titer if you are monitoring them. The maintenance immunosuppression has been steroid mycophenolate and CNIs, preferably tacrolimus, and CNIs and mycophenolate mofetil are started 7 to 14 days prior to plasma exchange or immunoadsorption. And the CMV and the cotrimoxazole prophylaxis is something that needs to be religiously followed in the patients. So the displayed study, I would be discussing, these are my last 3 slides. I will be discussing 2 meta-analysis. One, the first meta-analysis, which was published in the year 2018, is a report of 26 studies, which also includes 20 patients from India. The 26 studies included 1,300 odd patients, and they compared 1,300 incompatible patients to about 5,000 ABO compatible patients. And the follow-up was 37 months in the ABO incompatible group compared to 40 months in the ABO compatible group. So the recipients of ABO incompatible allografts were slightly older, and all the 26 studies reported the 1-year survival. There was no significant differences between ABO compatible and ABO incompatible transplant with respect to the uncensored graft survival at the first year. The combination of the data revealed that the survival, 1-year graft survival, was 98% in the ABO compatible versus 96% in the ABO incompatible. The difference was statistically significant. However, the difference, I don't know how much would be, it would really translate to a clinical effect. The subgroup analysis dividing plasmapheresis and immunoadsorption also revealed that there was no difference in between the 2 subgroups. The graft survival at 3 years remained inferior. Again, the difference was only 2%. The highlight is the risk of rejections. In the ABO compatible transplant, the risk of rejection was only 2%, and the risk of rejection was 10%. That was 5 times higher in an ABO incompatible as compared to the ABO compatible group. So the summary is the summary of the study would be is the ABO incompatible kidney transplant recipients have good outcome with minimal differences from an ABO compatible transplant, however, with an increased risk of rejections. 2019, there was another meta-analysis with larger population, which was published in the Lancet. It included 7,000 odd patients who had undergone ABO incompatible renal transplant. Compared to an ABO compatible transplant, ABO incompatible transplant was associated with higher 1-year mortality with an odds ratio being 2.17. The mortality was also higher at 3 and 5 years and was statistically significant. The death-censored survival was also higher in the ABO. The death-censored survival was better in the ABO compatible as compared to an ABO incompatible transplant. The 5-year survival was comparable. 5-year death-censored survival was comparable between ABO compatible and an incompatible transplant. So the conclusion is, despite significant progress in desensitization over the last 10-15 years, the 1 and 3-year survival is poorer in ABO incompatible as compared to an ABO compatible transplants. So it wouldn't be really, practical to compare an ABO incompatible transplant to an ABO compatible transplant. It may be more practical to compare an ABO incompatible transplant to surviving on dialysis. So the present slide, is a summary of the ABO incompatible desensitization protocol. The protocol is more or less similar. However, there can be small differences between various centers. At PJ, we start with rituximab and mycophenolate mofetil maybe at day minus 22 of a tentative date of transplant, followed by tacrolimus introduction maybe around day minus 10 of transplant, then immunoadsorption or double filtration plasmapheresis or plasma exchange depending upon your availability and your experience, to be started about day minus 7 of tentative date of transplant. And once you get a titer to 1:4 to 1:8, you can go ahead with transplant with induction with ATG or besiliximab, and continue TAC and mycophenolate mofetil and introduction of steroids. Then regarding the further post-transplant course is more or less same. Some units do follow rigorous monitoring of the titers in the post-transplant period. And if there is an increase, 2 to fold increase, they do introduce plasma exchange. And the plasma exchange is also introduced if there is evidence of antibody-mediated rejection. So, the last slide is on the salient histopathology of patients with ABO-incompatible transplant. Up to 3/4 of the patients can have accommodation. Accommodation means there is presence of only, deposition of C4D without any morphology of and suggestive of antibody-mediated rejection, which is exceedingly common. And the other feature which is common in patients of an ABO-incompatible transplant as compared to an ABO-compatible transplant is presence of thrombotic microangiopathy. Thrombotic microangiopathy is also reported in patients who have a titer which is undetectable. It could be very much possible that the current detection techniques is unable to detect those antibodies, and patients with TMA portend poor prognosis, just like other TMAs. So with this, I conclude my talk, and I would take questions after the completion of the sessions. Thank you.